Hey. So, welcome back, and let's dive into John chapter 6 today. What we have labeled the feeding of the 5,000. And I want to point something out that I think this is a story where we want to make it more than it really is. This is one where I talk about we Americanize it, like we want to turn it into 3 points and a lesson versus honoring what it really was saying back then and should be saying to us today. One of the words that John uses in his gospel is the word sign. He doesn't use the word miracle. He uses the word sign. And this is a place where he talks about another sign. Water to wine was a sign. Healing the man of 38 years of paralysis, a sign. And John is trying to point out who Jesus is versus just what Jesus does. And so keep that in mind, like as you read the Gospel of John, but also the stories. We already looked at the end of the Gospel, and John says these were written to prove who he was, to prove the story, the credibility of Jesus Christ. And this would be another one that's trying to prove a sign proving who he is. So John 6, I'm going to begin with verse 1, read a few verses. But I also, before I jump in, I want to point out something else. John 6 starts out saying sometime later, sometime after this, or some kind of phrase like that. And this would be an example where if you read the Bible only in chapter and verse, if you started right here, if you don't know what after this is, you're really starting in the middle of something here. We know, because you've been hanging out with Bob, that after this is he just healed the guy of 38-year paralysis. And so we know a crowd is following him. We know a little time elapses, and that's what it's referring to. And so he now has this following that is growing. And it says, so sometime after this, Jesus crosses to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is the Sea of Tiberias, and a great crowd followed him because they saw the sign he had performed by healing the sick, the sign. Jesus went up on a mountainside, sat down with the disciples. A little clue here, the Jewish Passover festival was near. The Passover, to remind you, is an annual celebration of back in the Old Testament where through Moses, God delivers Israel through the plagues and all of that, the night of Passover. If you're old enough to remember Charlton Heston in the movie, that's what they're remembering every year is God delivered them and there was a Passover night. So we know it's that time of the year. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming to him, he says to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked this only, listen to this, to test him, for he already knew what he was going to do. It's what the scripture says. Philip said, "It's going to take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread, so each one just has a bite. 6 months, 8 months salary just to buy a little happy meal for everybody." Another disciple of his, Andrew, by the way, Andrew's nickname we've given him is the introducer. Andrew is always introducing somebody to Jesus when you see his name. Andrew says, Simon Peter's brother, Andrew, spoke up and said, "There's a kid here, a boy, with five small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will that go among so many?" So 5 loaves, think of little loaves of bread, literally like fazoli's type stuff, and then 2 small fish, just something the kid had literally for his lunch. And Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There were plenty of grass in the area. They sat down, about 5,000 men. So you don't miss this. There are women and children too. So we're looking at 10 to 15,000 people are here. 5,000 men plus others. Then Jesus took the loaves, those 5, gave thanks, distributed it to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. And when they had enough to eat, he said to the disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over, let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them, filled 12 baskets with the pieces of barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. In other words, there's more now than when they started. So let's talk through this a little bit. Again, I think we want to make this a little more than it is. And yet at the same time, there's plenty in there to go, OMG, this is amazing, and it has application to my life. So Passover, we already have that. There are multitudes following him because of the 38-year miracle, other miracles he had already performed. The challenge in front of them is 10 to 15,000 people, and there's no food. Jesus tests Philip by saying, what are we going to do here? Philip thinks about resources instead of considering who he's really hanging out with. And I think an easy application here is often in our life, we're going to look at what we have, and there may be times the need is so big that we come to really bad conclusions. Like, I think in our faith and in life, sometimes we almost feel like we have to have enough solution for the problem versus knowing that God truly can help multiply and do things bigger in our life than we ever could. In other words, water to wine, like that doesn't compute. Like they had no wine, they had water. He has a little lunch, but he needs a buffet. And so in life, don't ever try to connect that you have enough for God. God doesn't need your enough. He just needs what you have. And Andrew, the introducer, brings this kid up with this sack lunch, this little Happy Meal. And even he goes, like, what are we going to do here? And again, I think it's all about God having access to what we do have. God can take our little and make it much more than anything we could ever do with it on our own. God doesn't need much, but he needs what we have. God doesn't need much, but he needs what we have. Need and supply are not always going to make sense. It's just, can God have access to what I have? My gifts, my abilities, my talents, my resources, those things. And then this sign, the miracle, right, is Jesus has them all sit down. Again, I don't know why, but we need to know that for some reason. But also, this is, I think, the only miracle, i.e. sign, that's in all the Gospels. The only one, I believe. I'm quite sure of it, actually. I would say I bank on that instead of acting like I'm guessing here. But I want you to hear the process that Jesus does with this sack lunch. It says he takes it, he blesses it, he breaks it, multiplies it. He takes it, blesses it, multiplies it, breaks it, multiplies it. And I think there's a challenge in our life to where when you're holding a little sack lunch, a little bit of nothing, and you need a whole lot of something, for us to take it and go, thank you for this, God. This is amazing. I give it to you. And when we give it to him, whatever it is, the insignificant, the unknown, the invisible, the things that we think, oh, it's just not, and all of that, and we give it to him, just imagine, if you would, if he takes it and then thanks God the Father for it. It's in his hands, things are multiplied, not in our hands. And so when we give him whatever we have, he can take it, bless it, give it back to us multiplied many times over. Multiplication happens in his hands, not in ours. Everyone eats as much as they want beyond their need. Think about this. And now there's more than they had at the beginning. And the crowd wants to make him king. They still don't get it. They still don't understand he's here for spiritual reasons, not political reasons. So Jesus kind of draws away from that. However, I don't want you to miss this. If you keep reading, which you should, there's a moment later where Jesus kind of says, here's what this is really about. I'm the bread of life. And he teaches like about his body being the bread and his blood being the wine. And I just thought, like, when you read that, if you were in real time, he is blowing your mind. There's no context. He basically says you have to eat my flesh. And of course, in real time, it would make zero sense. But this is one of the I ams of Jesus. I am the bread of life. And he's trying to teach us that he has the sustenance. He has everything we need forever from inside out when we have Jesus in our life. So they're remembering a provision of Jesus in the Old Testament. Jesus will teach us later, give us this day our daily bread. And then he goes, I am the bread. I'm the bread of life. And so he's trying to help us go beyond, hey, Jesus, I got this thing. I need a lot of things, to where it's about relationship. It's about us having the bread of life in our life, to where we're living inside out, not outside in. And so I would just challenge you through this to not think like, okay, if I have a little, it certainly has relevance. But the greater reason we know this story, John said, this is another sign that you would know who he is, not just what he does. And when we get that backwards, we have a very transactional relationship with Jesus. Our prayers are all transactional. Hey, it's almost like a Santa Claus list. We go to him with verses, I want to know you more. I need you to be closer in my life. I need to be closer to you, because when we have the bread of life, everything else really takes care of itself. And I would just challenge you today to see, where are you in relationship with him as the bread of life, not the guy who multiplies the bread in your life. Completely different paradigm. In other words, do you trust him and do you know him? Not just do you ask him for stuff and trust and hope he does. Do you trust him to be the bread of life for everything in your life, your needs, your soul, your spirit? And out of that trust, do you know him versus some transactional thing? And so if I were pulling out of this lesson today, one of the things I would be asking is, if he gave me a sign today, i.e. John 6, would I be challenged to know him better? Do I know him as the guy that I bring lists to, or do I know him as the guy, as the Son of God who wants to be a part of my life? And I ideally should want him to be in me, in my life, in all facets of my life. Do I know that guy? And if not, that's really where to land on this. So again, I'd love to hear your comments, your thoughts, and thank you for hanging out with me in these. I love these. As you know, I love the book of John. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, and just the challenges, but also the taking, the blessing, and the breaking, the faith versus sight. It's not about bread. It's about the bread of life. God bless.